listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast by Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb, Dr. Frederick J. Long, Dr. Mario Melendez, Dr. Jennifer Noonan, and J. M. Smith. Welcome and enjoy.
Shalom, this is Dr. Jennifer Noonan. I want to welcome you to this week's SLA Insight. I'm continuing with this idea of input and specifically comprehensible input. In the last episode, I did an introduction to input and talked about how pretty much everyone in SLA agrees that input is necessary for language acquisition to occur, and then how Creation focused that to this idea of comprehensible input and putting in the input hypothesis, the idea that if I represents the input that is completely understandable or comprehensible to the learner, then I plus one is input that is ideal for acquisition. That is input that is 1 degree more difficult than what the learner can understand. It's still a bit abstract. If we were to put it in more concrete terms, research has been done in the area of reading comprehension that says that if you can understand 95 to 98% of the words in a text, that would be roughly the I plus one, then you can comprehend the text and, more importantly, you can learn from the text along the way. So this I plus one or the 95 to 98% coverage are kind of saying similar things. This idea that if you understand everything in the input, there's nothing to learn. But if it's too difficult, and the research on the reading says even at 90%, students are not understanding the text and they're not able to learn from it. And so that poses for those of us who teach ancient languages, all we have are these ancient texts that are largely not comprehensible, certainly not at that 95 to 98% range for beginning students. So the challenge is, how do we get to comprehensible input? How do we make the input we have comprehensible for our students to get them into that I plus one or 95 to 98% coverage, the place that's ideal for acquisition and learning? So there are at least 3 ways that you can do this. One is through contextual clues, providing context for this text. Another is simplifying the input, making it easier, bringing it down to that level where the students can comprehend it. And a third is providing opportunities for the students to negotiate meaning in the context of conversation. For today, I'm only going to focus on the first one, and that is the contextual clues. And the advantage of this one is you can work with the original text. You don't need to modify it in any way. You just provide context to help bring the students up to the level of I plus one or 95 to 98% coverage, because the text as it is probably, depending on your student and their level, 50% or I plus 8, rather than the ideal for comprehension and acquisition. So to illustrate this point and to help you understand where we're going with it, I want you to think about your favorite children's book, maybe let's say The Cat in the Hat. Think about what you would see on each page of that text. You see a few words, but lots of pictures, and pictures that represent the ideas that are communicated by the words. So when it's talking about a boat, there's a picture of a boat. When it's talking about a kite, there's a picture of a kite. And when it talks about something unreasonable or never encountered before, like a fish on a rake in The Cat in the Hat, there's a picture to help you. So I'm going to share my screen. I have one page from The Cat in the Hat that I want to show you here, just to help see what we're talking about here. So here we have the cat in the hat, who is now loaded with all kinds of things he's showing off. And perhaps, just for sake of argument, think that you maybe are somebody who doesn't know what a rake is and is talking about, and I've got a fish on a rake. And so you look at this picture and you're like, oh, okay, a rake. Now I know what the rake is. But it's more understandable if you're somebody who doesn't know what a fish on a rake is. If I had never read this story before, if I didn't have the picture to look at, I would be scratching my head also. What in the world does he mean by a fish on a rake? But the picture brings that concept into focus. It's like, oh, okay, I get it. A fish on a rake. Not what I see in everyday pictures, but there it is. And so this contextual clue in the form of a drawing, a visual aid, is one way of bringing the text to the point of that I+1 or 95 to 98% coverage. So, as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. For a young reader, the Cat in the Hat might be at I+3, but with the pictures, it's now at I+1, at a point where they can read, understand, and learn. They've now learned an added dimension or an added use for a rake. Maybe not the most common, but you get the idea. So now think about what we have in ancient languages, Hebrew, Greek, Latin. We've got these ancient texts that are too difficult for many readers, especially beginners. And not to mention a few texts that are so difficult, even the experts can't agree on what they mean. So if we add pictures to the text to provide context, that visual representation of what the words are communicating are going to help bridge the gap and bring the students up to the point of 95 to 98%. The pictures can fill in some of those gaps and help them understand what's going on in the text and get them to the point where they can start comprehending the text and thus able to start acquiring language from the text. They can also provide an initial context for a student who's coming to the text cold, that is, without any, right dropped into the middle of a particular passage. Who's talking? Where are we in the Bible? And so the pictures can help give them even that referential context to get them a start into whatever the passages that they're reading at the time. So a couple examples that are being used right now. One is using photos for vocabulary learning. So I'm going to share my screen once again. This time, a picture that I've taken, part of a series that I've collected of pictures that represent vocabulary items to help students learn vocabulary. Now, for this one, it's specific for eating. But you could create a whole story around this picture. Man was outside and he was eating a piece of bread and, he was thinking about where he was going to go next. So it doesn't have to be just a singular word. These can lead to other stories and simplified stories, which I'll talk about in the next episode. But just photographs of, and it could be items, it could be a chair, it could be a table, it could be food, it could be animals, but things like that would help students learn their vocabulary and helping to get them more quickly to understand the text. Another resource that is available and in print and more coming out all the time is the Glossa House Illustrated Biblical Text Series. And in this, very helpful, you get the original text, Hebrew or Greek, and I think there's even a Latin one or two out that's available. And then these effectively storyboards that go with the text and illustrate what's going on in the text. And for help at the bottom, there's the English translation of the text. So again, you can stick with the original text of Scripture. We're not going simplified or anything like that, and still increase the comprehension of the students as they're reading the text along the way. These visual aids are great, and they're two-dimensional, and we don't have to stick with photos and illustrations. They're drawings, maps, diagrams, family trees, all kinds of ideas that can help you make the text comprehensible, make the connections in the student's brain to help them understand the text to get to I+1 or the 95 to 98% coverage needed to understand the text. But we can go beyond two-dimensional and think three-dimensional. in the context of a class, stuffed animals, actual food, imitation realia, coins, lamps, pottery, a model of the temple or of a four-room house. But then think even further. Think five senses, motion pictures demonstrating a video, enacting a scene, smells, tastes, textures, even music, if you want to, the evil guy with the dangerous music that comes on. But ultimately, you're only limited by your imagination. The goal, however, is to get what would be otherwise incomprehensible to the place where it is comprehensible for the learner, the place where acquisition is optimal. So, by way of review, if comprehensible input at the level of I+1 is ideal for acquisition, then we need to find ways to get our texts that are otherwise I+8 or 10 to the point where they're I+1, at a level where the students will understand and that they will be able to most effectively acquire more language. And so providing contextual clues is one way of doing that. Visual aids, photos, but again, broaden out into your five senses to help the students understand the text. So in the next couple episodes, we're going to talk about other ways to make input comprehensible, including things like simplifying the input and providing opportunities for negotiation of meaning. But until then, have a great week.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glossa House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.